The Huffington Post did a great poll to illustrate how misinformed voters are when it comes to actual policy. Now, what they did is that they randomly assigned one half of the 1,000 Americans surveyed to say whether they agreed with positions that Donald Trump held. The rest were asked whether they agreed with positions held by President Obama, Secretary of State John Kerry, or current Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Now, here's the amazing thing about this. The positions that they said were held by the different politicians, they were exactly the same positions. Now, some of the questions they asked about were universal health care, the Iran deal, Social Security, and affirmative action. Now, a couple of those are very controversial, especially affirmative action and universal health care, which is somewhat polarizing. Now, here's the other amazing thing. The respondents' reactions were decidedly different depending on who supported the policy. Quote, hearing that Trump supported a certain policy was enough to cause Democrats to reconsider ideas they'd otherwise support, and for Republicans to endorse positions they'd usually avoid. Oh, this is great. Quote, still associating a particular politician with a certain position wasn't enough for people to abandon their most deeply held convictions. Protecting Social Security, for example, is an overwhelmingly popular idea, whether or not it's being proposed by Clinton or by Trump. Now, the article continues. Although most Republicans say they strongly disagree with Democrats on health care, Iran, and affirmative action, fewer than a quarter of Republicans strongly disagreed when those positions were presented as Trump. Wow. So Trump held these positions, and suddenly Republicans are like, oh, you know what? It's not so bad. Oh, universal health care? Actually, yeah, it doesn't sound too bad. Yeah. Go Trump. Make America great again. Isn't that fascinating? Now, Democrats, a majority of whom said they strongly agreed with their party on health care, were a little bit less supportive when Trump was the one endorsing the policy. Now, that's also interesting. You do see a difference. You do see a little bit of a drop in support by Democrats for universal health care when Trump is the one that's supporting it. Now, this has some major implications. But first, before I get into that, I want to actually show you some charts to sort of illustrate this. So take a look at this. Now look at that. Barack Obama / Donald Trump has praised the idea of universal health care. Do you agree or disagree with Obama-Trump about universal health care? Now, on the side where it says agree with Obama, Democrats are over 80%. Whereas Republicans are somewhere around 18%. That's pretty freaking low. However, when it comes to Trump, Democrats drop to about 42%, while Republicans, well, it's more like 43, 44%. And Republicans that agree with Trump, they're actually about 42%. Oh, that's amazing. It's the same thing. But when Obama agrees with it, Republican support shrinks. But when Trump agrees with it, Democrat support shrinks. But it still holds about even. Fascinating. There's more. The next thing up is the Iran deal. Now, the Iran deal, in the article it says, while Trump opposes the Iran deal, he told NBC News that it's very hard to say that we're ripping it up, and that he would instead police the contract so tough that they don't have a chance. Now, so let's look at the graph on that. Let's look at the chart here. Now, John Kerry, Donald Trump, is opposed to ripping up the deal to put limits on Iran's nuclear program and instead argues that it must be strictly enforced. Do you agree or disagree with Kerry / Trump about the Iran deal? Now look at this. Now, agree with Kerry, you have about 20% of Republicans and somewhere around 50% of Democrats. However, when Trump brings it up and says he supports this, which he said he did, you have 50% of Democrats and about 49% of Republicans, according to this data. It's almost statistically even. God, that's amazing. And finally, there's another chart Social Security. Now, this is also pretty interesting. Now, Hillary Clinton / Donald Trump says Social Security should be protected from budget cuts. Do you agree or disagree with Clinton / Trump about Social Security? Well, about 84% of Democrats agree with Clinton, while about 59% of Republicans agree with that. Social Security is very popular, understandable. But when Trump says it, Democratic support stays about the same, but when it comes to Republicans, they agree. It goes up. Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So, basically, what does this mean? Well, from what I can tell is that Democrats, for the most part, they do pay more attention to the issues instead of who's talking about the issues, who's supporting the issue. Now, many Republican voters, it also turns out, do support liberal policies if presented by a conservative in a conservative fashion, if they actually talk about it in conservative terms. That usually means simplifying it and saying, no, this is good, this is why, and being strong on this policy. For example, the minimum wage. A January poll says 53% of Republicans actually support raising the minimum wage to $12.50 an hour by 2020. Now, midterm voters in southern states, if you remember the midterms, it was a complete blowout. A lot of Democrats stayed home while Republicans rushed to the polls. And they ejected a lot of Democrats. Now, those Democrats weren't exactly the most liberal either. And I've hammered that point before. However, in these states where Democrats got overturned and replaced by Republicans, you also had referendums in those states. For example, Arkansas, they voted to raise the minimum wage, among other southern states, while still voting for Republicans that hate the minimum wage, Republican politicians. So what that seems to me to be is a disconnect between Republican voters and Republican politicians. And that's, of course, because Republican politicians tend to support large multinational corporations instead of people. So the conclusion to this, and the results that I kind of draw from this whole thing, is that I think it's a big case of Republicans hating Obama and not caring as much about the policy, unless it's brought by the person that has an R in front of their name. Now, it doesn't matter if you reach across the aisle as a Democrat and adopt Republican ideas, because as soon as you do that, the Republicans will flee from that idea. They will turn on their old ideas. And look at Obamacare as a great example. Remember, this was successful in Massachusetts under Mittens J. Romneyton III. It was very successful there. And very popular. And then when Obama adopted it and brought it nationally, he didn't get a single Republican vote. And that's because the whole premise of the modern Republican Party, at least since Obama has been elected, is that we hate Democrats. We hate the black man in the White House. We will not work with you. Remember, Mitch McConnell said, our number one priority is to make Obama a one-term president, and we'll do everything we can. That means sabotaging the government. Sabotaging the country, and then we can blame Democrats for it, and then use that to get votes. Use that to get back into power. That's what I draw from this. I mean, it's pretty obvious that a lot of the Republican voters don't really pay attention to the issues. And when they do, they actually like the issues. And the only time they like the issues, I should say, is when it's a Republican or when it's Donald Trump talking about the issue. That's why we cannot keep adopting Republican positions on things, because they're going to abandon those and go even more conservative and go to more positions that are actually more harmful for the country. Basically, when it comes to governing, you actually can't have a successful government if one side isn't actually interested in doing the governing itself. That's why nothing happens when Republicans get into office, because they don't want to do anything. the only thing that they care about, unfortunately, is winning.